Okay, let's get in amongst all of those people on a bus tonight travelling round the north for our Grisly trail. Are you ready to go, everybody? Yeah. Let's go. Right now, if you've been in the Civic Centre, have you seen the swans? There's like a little fountain with some swans that's taken off. At the time of the second plague of Newcastle, exactly where the swans are was a plague pit. They piled the bodies in there and they dug it 18 foot deep, and they'd laid it about 5 or 6 layers of bodies when they realised that some of the people in the pit were still alive, and they were shouting, "Help, let me out, let me out, let me out." They thought, well, there's another 10,000 bodies to go down the hole, so we haven't got time for that, so hire me in, let's get it all done, because all of the people there didn't want to catch the plague. They would, and they'd die themselves. But exactly where the swans are, that's where the huge pit is. However, the story that we've heard, and I've heard it from about 3 or 4 different sources, is actually quite beautiful, because they filled the pit in, covered it up, they set it on fire before they did. When the ashes died down, they threw, like they always did in plague pits, another layer of bodies on it, then another layer. However, the last 8 or 9 layers of bodies, they just left where they were. And when they went down away from it, they kept hearing noises coming from the pit. And this is about 8.5 months after the plague pit had been left. Soil over the top of it. At the time, there was no buildings there, obviously, you're going way, way back. And they started to dig down, and the priests are saying, look, if there's somebody alive in there, we have to get them out. They dug down 8 months after the plague pit was put in place, and they found a huge, giant person who'd been surviving on rainwater dripping through the bodies, or what was left of them. He'd been eating the bodies of the plague victims, and he'd survived there for 8 months. And he was huge. I mean, this guy, he obviously wasn't just saying, I think I'll have a little buttock, I'll have the lot. He was filling himself, he was huge. And he came out of the pit, and somebody hit him with a shovel, like you probably would if you think some cannibalistic things just got out of a plague pit. What am I going to do with him? You're not going to bring him in for tea. So they hit him with a shovel, and he exploded. And he's known as the Newcastle bloater. And they say that fishermen who used to deliver fish from North Shields up the Tyne, the reason they give a name to a fish that's a bottom feeder that eats absolutely anything is a bloater. So next time you're offered at your fishmonger's a bloater, you'll know what we're talking about. Gray's Monument, we've passed. You've all seen Gray's Monument, haven't you? Gray's Monument was built 1838. Lord Grey, he was the Prime Minister of England at one time, Lord Grey. But in 1941, during the Blitz, some seagull landed on Lord Grey's head, and his head fell off, right? And it landed at the base of the building, and it knocked his nose off, essentially. Some say that a couple of days before it had been struck by lightning, and the seagull just finished it off. However, while resculpting was going on, they sent the head off to get resculpted again. And while it was away, people kept looking up and seeing Lord Grey's head still on it. But it couldn't have been, because it was knocked off. But the head kept looking down, and it became so common it was on the front page of the Evening Chronicle, and thousands of people from all over the northeast came to Gray's Monument. And whether it's like mass hysteria or mass hypnosis or whatever it was, but 9 out of 10 of them all claimed that they'd seen Lord Grey looking down, and some of them were waving at him and taking old-fashioned photographs of the man. Thousands of people saw them. Also, somewhere we'll not be going, but next time you're in town, you'll know about the Granger Market. How many of you shopped in the Granger Market? Butchers, usually flowers, sometimes. The Granger Market, in the 1800s, the Granger Market wasn't shops, wasn't stores. It was the end of a row of warehouses that went right the way down to the River Tyne, because we were getting all of our trade from the tall ships on the Tyne at the time. The 3 warehouses that are precisely where the Granger Market now stands, they were used by body snatchers for keeping bodies in tea chests. The tea chests were held in the Granger Market warehouses until they were stuck on the back of a horse and cart and carriage and taken up to doctors in Edinburgh and Glasgow to practice their various surgery skills. Birkenhair's very last northeastern, because they started on the River Wear, Birkenhair, before they went up to become Scotland's great body snatchers. The very last bodies that they moved from Newcastle were taken by a coach from Collingwood Street, but they were held in the Granger Market warehouses. So strange but true. Big Market, everybody's been down the Big Market. Where are we now? Passing the Theatre Royal. That has a famous ghost attached to it. It's another one of these long... I get a bit bored by women in long gowns that sweep from gallery to gallery and you hear the rustle of their petticoat, because they're not as exciting to see as a bloater. Let's just put it that way. However, the Big Market, which is kind of the direction where we're going, in the 1700s, one of the first super famous murders took place down there. Anybody ever had a drink in the Old George? It's very famous down the Big Market, and it's the scene of a murder back in the day. The problem with Newcastle over the years has been it can't make its mind up whether or not it's friends of the Scots or whether it's friends of the English king. And we've kind of wavered a bit, and then eventually we decided to fight for King George, and that's how we became Geordies, because we were Georgie's men first. I know a lot of people say it's to do with Geordie Ridley and the Geordie lamp for down the pits. They all came later. We were Georgies long before that. And down here at the Old George, where we're heading, a Scottish Highlander from a Highland regiment. At the time we were at peace with Scotland, he decided he was going on the lash down the Big Market, as people still do on a regular basis. He went into the George Tavern, which is now the Old George. People were starting to take the mickey out of him because he had a kilt on. Didn't take much, really, to start a fight down the Big Market. And eventually he asked the guy to step outside along that little dark alley that's still there. And if you look on the wall of that alley, you will see the bullet hole where this man pulled out a musket and shot the other fella through the head. The guy, the Scotsman, was called MacDonald. They knew he was a MacDonald because they put their hand up his kilt and it was a quarter-pounder. Sorry. I know. Said it was going to be a long night. But anyway, MacDonald's very famous because his nickname's 3 times hanged MacDonald, because he was sentenced to death. And they hanged him. They hanged him just behind where the police station used to be on Carlisle Square, not far from where we set off. On the 3rd hanging, they pulled him down. He was still breathing. And that technically means he's free. So they said that to the guy who was the coroner. And this will tell you a lot about the time you were living in. The coroner then said, as far as I'm concerned, he's dead. Now, everybody around him says, but he's not dead. So the coroner hit him with a hammer and then said, I think he is dead. And when they checked him, he absolutely was. The Castle Keep we've passed, you know where that is. The Scots used to hurl the heads of captured British prisoners or English prisoners over the castle wall to try and intimidate. And you know the statement of Newcastle, Fortita o defendis triumphant. It meant we won, they lost. And also the castle was used as a prison for some time. And there's a horrible story about a girl called Bryony. Bryony was Irish, 14. She moved across for a better life, and she came to Newcastle. She was selling stuff on the streets, just things like Lucky Heather. You know, back in the day, obviously, was a big and important thing. Buy it off an Irish gypsy girl. But little Bryony, only 14, her mother was very ill. Her dad wasn't on the scene, so she was trying to look after the family on her own. One day she was in town, and a leading councilman who was head of Newcastle Council at the time saw the girl, and the girl came up and says, "Do you want to buy some lucky heather?" And the guy told her where to go. And just at the moment that he said that, a bee flew out of the heather and stung him on the face, which I thought he deserved. However, he said, "Arrest this girl, she's assaulted me." They put Bryony in the castle keep, the only female prisoner with 114 convicts, all male. They all raped her. At the end of it, she was set to be released. She hemorrhaged and she died, and her ghost is said to be one of those that walks around the castle keep. The councilman, nothing happened to him. Justice did not befall him. However, he had 3 daughters, and I'm a great believer in karma anyway. You keep saying it. It sometimes doesn't come around quick enough for me, but his 3 daughters, and they were all in their early teens, and he was hoping to get the first one married. They all died of typhus. So whether that was his payback for what he'd done, and I'm sure she probably wasn't the only person that had fallen foul of him. The Tyne Theatre we've driven past not so very long ago. It's just up one of these roads here. You know the Tyne Theatre. The famous story about the Tyne Theatre is the using a cannonball for a sound effect, and they put a channel right the way around the upstairs of the auditorium. So when they wanted thunder, you just let the cannonball loose and it would brrrr down this metal track, recreating the sound of thunder, until one day somebody got up to walk out of the theatre and he banged the metal tray and created a dent in it. So when the cannonball came rolling down the hill, it hit this dent, jumped out of the tray, landed on a man's head, flattened it, killed him, dead outright. And for 113 years, the Tyne Theatre used to put an empty seat there with a mannequin in it rather than risk the curse striking anybody else. We did a show from the Tyne Theatre. You know, we always say discount 95% of everything, look for the 5% that you can't change or that is inexplicable. And when we were there, the guy who does all of the ins and outs, the master stagehand, he heard a noise coming from backstage. He came running to me and says, "You'll not believe what I've just seen," because this guy didn't believe in ghosts. He's worked in the theatre for years, hasn't seen anything. And he said, "We've just put a new set in for the new stage thing that was happening at the weekend. It was a tribute to Brendan Healy, who was amazing, a lovely man. For the tribute, they had to bring in a huge crane to lift this 3.5-ton stage set. And while we were there, the set moved 8 feet to the left. And when they moved the curtain back, nobody could explain it, because essentially it was in the wrong place. And they would have to then get a crane in the next morning to move it back again. But nobody had any explanation, because when we started, it was all in exactly the right place. How many of you can remember the Haymarket Cinema in Newcastle? It was the ABC, you're quite right. It used to be a song. Well, we're coming down past the Tyne Theatre at the present moment. We captured on tape while we were in there. We captured one of our listeners heard somebody whistling. We caught that on tape too from one of the back rooms. Directly beneath the Tyne Theatre, there's a wall that separates the Tyne Theatre from a Jewish cemetery. And in the basement, people who are also Jewish have started bringing the ashes of their relatives to go down up against the wall to be as close to other members of their faith. But it's interesting that everybody that was there, including the woman who works there booking acts in, she was very swift to say that she didn't believe at the very beginning. Yet while we were there, she was sitting in the gods at the very top. And suddenly, and we caught this on tape, all of the seats started flicking up in the row that she was sitting in. I give her full credit, because we thought there was a haunting, because we heard all these footsteps of somebody running, and it was her running down from the top gallery after realizing there was something walking along the row to try and reach her. I mean, literally everywhere you go. We told the story of Earl Grey. Windows record stores just around here somewhere as well. JG Windows. Now, Windows, oh yeah, with the gate, lovely. JG Windows, there was a bank manager used to work in the bank there. Somebody robbed him, came in. hit him over the head, stole about £15,000, which at the time was an absolute fortune, talking Victorian times. There's a little gate, you'll look for it, there's a metal gate opposite where Saks the hairdressers used to be. And the people in the hairdressers kept saying that they used to be able to see somebody walking up to the gate and rattling it as if to try and get out. And they believed that that's the ghost, because the police were called, they went in, there's nobody about. And they believed that that was purely and simply the guy trying to escape, trying to get back out there, who had died. Along here, whereabouts are we now? Oh, the church on your right-hand side, in the basement of the church there's said to be one of the leading Vikings of all time buried in the crypt. They said they'd never buried anybody in the church that wasn't a Christian. This Viking decided he was going to become a Christian, but they wouldn't bury him there. So a load of money exchanged hands, and he's buried there. And I think you find when it comes to the church, if you give them a check big enough, you can say, you'll get away with pretty much anything. As we're heading now, I mean, everybody who's ever come to the north, you know, this neck of the woods, this whole area is an area where William Wallace had one of his biggest battles. Into Eldon Square, I mean, it didn't used to be buildings here, of course. This was part of the town moor that now belongs to the freeman of the city, but it was fields right the way down here. At the time, most of the houses back in the day when Wallace attacked the city were behind city walls, and that's further south of here. This was still fields mostly up here. But Wallace came down 3 times. The last time he came back was half his head, his shoulder, and one of his arms, because when he was, you've all seen Braveheart, I'm guessing. Yeah, thank you. If you've seen Braveheart, right at the very end, when he gets tortured to death and killed, and he's hanged, but he wasn't dead, then he was drawn, but he wasn't dead, then he was quartered. A quarter of him went to Edinburgh, quarter of him went to London, quarter of him came to Newcastle upon Tyne. At first, it was held on the Tyne Bridge, the Tyne Bridge being the swing bridge at the time, because that was the main crossing across the river. And then finally they brought it up to the castle wall at Gallowgate, St James's Park, which I think most of you will have visited at one time or the other. This particular part of town, literally right the way up to the top where the Dirty Angel is battlefield. And when they were actually building roads around this area, they kept finding spearheads and arrowheads and musket balls and all kinds of things, because this is a major battlefield. The Haymarket, the ABC, used to be just over here. For those of you that remember the ABC, it used to be on the corner. This has got nothing to do with ghosts per se, because the ABC used to be haunted. But the coolest thing in the world, that at the Haymarket, first place I ever saw an X film, changed my life. However, where the Haymarket stands in 1909, guess who was performing there? No, me. No, I was in the audience. But who was performing? That's the question. Only Buffalo Bill's Circus and Sitting Bull had a whole load of Red Indians dancing around chasing covered wagons and stuff. Now, personally, I think that's just how cool that we actually had Buffalo Bill right here in the heart of Newcastle upon Tyne. Now, I know we're heading up Claremont Road, I think. Claremont Road, witches were synonymous with older people. Older women used to get called a witch, even if they weren't. Now, I don't know about you, but my nana used to always, if ever you had a cold, she'd say, drink your buttercup syrup, or put some Vic on your chest, or whatever it is. Nanas always have the cure to everything. And my nana was no different. When she did the whole get well thing, if that had been back 500 years earlier, she'd have been hanged as a witch. Most people weren't burnt at the stake like people say. There was only about 26 of them in Britain over the years got burnt at the stake. Most of them got hanged. And also, halfway through, the Witchfinder General, who came up as far as Yorkshire, never got as far as Newcastle. However, he did send 2 of his lieutenants up here. The problem with killing a witch is if you harm a witch or you harm anybody who is allied to a witch, you suffer the same pain to the power of 10. Now, these guys weren't the cleverest people. They were very suspicious themselves. They were only killing old women, saying they were witches because they got a bounty on the head of each one. If you've ever seen, there's a Vincent Price film called The Witchfinder General. It's not a great film, but it's loosely accurate. At the end of his first year, he was said to have over £185,000. Now, that's a fortune now. Back then, it was billions. So when they say, well, how many people did you kill, Witchfinder? And he says, oh, a few hundred. He only got about £8 per witch. He was robbing the people who were witches. He was taking their property too. But people believe that he killed somewhere in the region of between 8 to 10,000 in his time. That's just in his first year. The karma thing again, I keep coming back to, he ended up being hanged as a heretic himself because they discovered he was making stuff up just to get people killed. Hello, young lady, will you sleep with me and I'll not say you're a witch? Tough call, isn't it? And that's the kind of stuff that he and his lieutenants used to do. If you give me your farm, I'll not say you're a witch. Well, you can make a bit of money under those circumstances, but he killed a lot. As I say, we're heading in the direction of Claremont Road, I think. I think we're going the fancy way around to the town moor. Now, the town moor, oh, blimey. Got some stories about the town moor. I mentioned Claremont Road because that's where they hanged witches. There was gallows on the town moor for almost 35 years where they were hanging witches most weekends. Have you been up Claremont Road to the Cat and Dog Shelter at any point? If you've driven up that road, you've probably seen the windmill that hasn't got any blades on it, but it's a golf building of some description. It is. Well, there used to be 4 witches living in that building, and they used to go around hanging around, and we're talking late 1800s. They used to hang around Newcastle Central Station for any runaway kids and take them up to the witch house, as it was called at the time, and used to carve the children up and eat them. The 4 witches were sisters, and as far as everybody living in the locality, they were all lovely. Couldn't say it. People living nearby, they were lovely neighbours. They'd help you. They'd look for your cat if your cat was missing. They were just nice, lovely people. However, they were eventually found out when a postman delivering a parcel couldn't get in the front door, thought they might be round the back. When they went round the back, they found them eating a young girl, raw, and he ran straight off, got the militia. They came down, and when they got there, the 4 witches were gone, and they found bits of about 30 different children in the house. Their bones had been boiled, and they had skulls and hands and all that kind of stuff lying around the place as kind of sculptures, living sculpture, well, dead sculptures. The castle walls, the castle wall that's opposite the Tyne Theatre that goes up towards Chinatown, there's a huge batch, there's a big pen nib stuck in the ground for no apparent reason there. Well, along there, another very famous murder of a young woman. She was chased along from where Rosie's Bar is on Stowell Street, Chinatown. She was chased. She had an argument with her boyfriend. She walked out. A couple of blokes saw her. She was very drunk, very angry. They got hold of her on that, just outside the city wall, again at a time when a lot of the buildings there weren't there, and they misused her and killed her. And her spirit's supposed to walk in and out of the wall. People have seen her walk up to the wall and then just disappear through it. And people who live on the opposite side, there's some small semi-detached properties on the yon end and a small terrace, they keep seeing this figure come through the wall and then disappear again. She was murdered in 1854. In 1973, made the front page of the Evening Chronicle, the same story, which is not exactly a story from 1854 being on the front page. Took a while for the news to get round, I'm guessing. But in 1973, front page story, 15 people were killed there. It was a major accident where a part of the old wall came down and hurt some people. And the reason that the crane driver gave of pushing the wall by accident was that he'd seen a woman come through the wall and then disappear back through it again. He took his eye off what he was doing. The crane hit some stones and rocks and took some people out. So kind of added to the ghost storiness of it. Weirdly, never been a sign of the people that were killed there, but people have actually seen things happen on the site as if two men are attacking a woman, and they've ran up to help, and before they can get to the woman, all three of them have disappeared. So it's almost like it's sometimes being reenacted, like a loop of tape every now and then this thing comes around. That whole area around there, of course, is known as Blackfriars. We're on the town moor now. As if you look to your, certainly to your left-hand side, my right, you will see that it's where the Hoppins is. You go to the Hoppins or not? Is it too dear? How much for a hot dog? It's all right. I'll kill my own and bake my own bread. Best hopping story, and there's a few town moor stories. Witch hangings at the bottom, like I mentioned, because the windmill thing is just over there. The Great Siege of Newcastle, Oliver Cromwell's troops, that's where he had them settled, in over 1,000 tents, and he outnumbered the people in Newcastle by about 4-1. If you look on the ground over there again, you quite often come across musket balls and stuff like that. My favourite story from the Hoppings is actually about the Hoppings, and this is going back to the late 60s, where the people who live in the houses just at the north end of the town moor hate it, and they ring me every year saying, every year the Hoppings comes, I start getting burgled, and they believe it's people that work on the fair are burgling all the houses in the vicinity, because within a week they'd be leaving with all their ill-gotten gains and the police wouldn't pursue them. And that's sad, but probably true. One day, somebody from one of those houses went down, and they used to have things on the Hoppings called freak shows. Those of you that are of any kind of age will remember them, absolutely. They would have like two-headed sheep and four-legged... Photographs of you in there? Oh, sorry. So, they used to have all that kind of stuff in there, but they also had babies in jars, and they had the heads of famous killers. Now, I always used to presume that the heads of famous killers were probably something made up of, I'm guessing, papier-mâché or plastic or whatever they could get their hands on, maybe wax, because waxworks are, that kind of thing would be possible. And yet one day this woman went in and she saw the head of somebody who was supposed to be Stalin, and it wasn't Stalin, it was her husband's head that had been stolen from his grave in Jesmond, and all of the heads in the jars on the freak show had been stolen from cemeteries, from newly formed graves the year before. She actually ran for the police. By the time the police were notified, they said, we'll go up in the morning. They went up in the morning, of course, the freak show was gone. Pretty much after that, freak shows started dying out, because it made the front pages of the local newspapers, but they couldn't prove it. So it was like, was it? Could it have been? The woman said, it was my husband. He wasn't looking well, obviously. He had a big tash, so they'd obviously thought, big tash, he must be Stalin. If he had a little tash, he'd be Hitler. They'd put them on display, and they'd toured all of England for a year with his head in the jar. It was never returned back to his body again. So the town moor, next time you go up, there's a lot of cool stories connected to the town moor. Oh, also, quite a cool thing just to finish with. I'm telling you about the Roundheads and Cavaliers, and the Roundheads got knacked. All the hairies, like myself, they all got completely stomped by the skinheads, which is how I remember the 70s. You know that King Charles I ended up getting his head chopped off, and Oliver Cromwell became protector of all England, and he banned Halloween, and he banned Christmas, and he banned all religious festivals because he was Puritan. Although that is a Christian, but he banned all the festivals because he didn't believe in them, because they were all based on pagan festivals, as most people know. However, the thing that I thought was great was there was a ginger called Captain Weatherly, and he was a Cavalier ultimately the last one in charge of the entire Cavalier forces. This is too hard even to believe, but this is what happened. Midway through the battle, the captain was caught short. So he got off his horse. He rode his horse out of the battle. He got off. Now, the town wasn't all just moor. There was trees and bushes and hedgerows and what have you at the time. So he went behind a hedge and squatted, and he was there for a little while because he had a bad belly. And he'd been suffering from this thing. He'd been treating it with stuff that made it worse, essentially, kind of quack cures. They captured him with his tunic around his ankles, and they dragged him in front of Oliver Cromwell, who was here, right on our home territory. He put the charm on a bit, and Cromwell said, "Well, what do you expect me to do with you?" And he said, "I surrender." And Cromwell went, "Well, what do you mean you surrender? We've captured you." He says, "No, I surrender. And if I surrender, then you have to treat me kindly. You can't hurt me if I surrender. If you caught me, but you didn't catch me. I was merely squatting behind a bush doing what nature intended. Now, the only reason I got off my horse was so I could surrender. Why else would I have got off my horse? If I wanted to run away, I'd just have beetled off." And because he'd kind of done it with a tongue-in-cheek way, Cromwell said, "Well, don't let me stop you then, off you go." Put him on his horse with his sore bum, and off he rode. And he was the only survivor of the entire battle because he had diarrhea. I don't know whether the smell might have had something to do with it. I don't know, but amazing. Also, the West Road Crematorium. Whereabouts are we now? Anybody got any relatives that have used the West Road? I think a lot of people, my folks are kicking around that neck of the woods too. That was also another batch of warehouses. Funnily enough, where the crematorium is, was more warehouses belonging to a miller who used to have another windmill that was up on the West Road. They were fairly common sights back in the day because people had to make bread. And this miller had a windmill up there. He also had two warehouses. He wasn't making enough money milling. So the thing that he did was he kept bodies, again for people, and he would stick them on those coaches back up to... I don't know why. I'm presuming that London had their own body snatchers to collect bodies, but up north we were providing hundreds every month to Scottish doctors all over the place. We also shipped bodies on boats to both Belfast and Dublin, and it always makes me wonder how the devil they didn't find their own people to be able to bury. Fenham, where Knights Templars, we're heading to the north end of Fenham as we speak. Fenham's directly behind me. Does anybody know much about the Knights Templars? You probably all watched the Da Vinci Code. You'll all have seen that. Loosely based on the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars are people who believed that Jesus had kids and he was married and had to hide them. And ultimately, if you follow the actual route, not the Dan Brown route, but if you follow the actual route that the Knight Templars travelled, they ended up travelling to France. Not so much to that lovely little Rosslyn Chapel up beside Glasgow, but they ended up in Provence, and there's a lovely little town there that has a cathedral. It is one of only two cathedrals in the world that has a picture of Satan on the ceiling and no religious iconography. And it's believed that the Knights Templars painted that because they were loyal to God and loyal to Jesus their whole lives, but they believed that the church was evil and they had to protect Jesus and his family. By which time, of course, Jesus was a very old man because he wasn't crucified. Oh, the stories we could tell. But the bottom line with the Knights Templars up here, the church decided, the Catholic Church, who used the Knights Templars kind of like bully boys. If there was a job to be done where they needed somebody killed, somebody murdered, a family wiped out, they'd send the knights in, say these people are heretics, go and kill them. Well, up here, the Knights Templars were based in Fenham, on a church not far from Atkinson Road, where my old school used to be. At the top of that bank there's a church, and then it goes all the way up to the West Road. It was on the Elzig end where the Knights Templars used to have a place. And when the Catholics decided that the Knights Templars actually had Jesus family, not Jesus but the family, they decided that the one thing that they had to do was wipe out Knights Templar wherever they found them. The majority of them were on Malta in a place called Valletta, and they went in and they wiped them out. They came to every town in England that had any Knights Templars, and they came to Newcastle and they massacred all of them. The Armstrong Road Cemetery. There's a cemetery on Armstrong Road beside a church there. There's a weeping ghost in the cemetery. The woman was raped and murdered in 1877, and she's seen there often lying on the top of a grave sobbing, and people have heard the cries and they've gone in to try and placate this lady, and when they get to her she disappears. Westgate Community College, again, if you know the West Road where all the shops from all over planet Earth belong. On the West Road where Westgate Community College is, we got a phone call from a guy about 2 years ago saying that he looked out of his house window, which overlooks the fields of Westgate Community College, and he saw a load of Romans, but the weird thing was they had loads of little horses. They were barely the size of ponies, had all these little tiny horses, and he says it didn't make any sense. And he says, I went back to bed. When I got up later, had another look out my window, there was nothing there. So I did a little bit of research, and I said, what did these people look like? He says, oh, they all had beards, but they were dressed in Roman garb. Well, to everybody's surprise, directly there, on the field where Westgate Community College is, that's where the Romans had a Spanish legion who all rode these tiny little Spanish ponies that they'd brought all the way from Spain. Now, we had no clue. I had no clue till I researched it. Spectacular place. I love the people from the West End. But there's a story just up here. When you come to the end of this road, you will see a building here. Exactly here on your left-hand side. It's an area of field now where a jousting took place in 1852. One of the... Oh, yow! Anybody got hemorrhoids? It's just a matter of time. Woo! No, but on this ground to the left-hand side, two lords decided they were going to slap each other across the face and challenge each other to a duel. One man was called Dickens, and Dickens decided, instead of counting the 10 steps, we'll be back to back, we'll take 10 paces, we will turn and we will fire. Dickens, being a politician, decided 8'll do, and he turned around, fired his pistol, blew the top of the man's head off. And then, of course, what he didn't realize is that the manners of the day, it means that if you don't obey the rules of the tourney, then you get shot by the people that are holding the weapons. So the man holding the weapons was his best friend, who then had to walk up to him and shoot him in the head. He had to die the same way that the man had died the other side. Now, occasionally, the people that live in Pendower up there, early in the morning, Saturday morning as well, they hear gunshots. And a lot of people will probably think, oh, they must be out shooting rats or something, or we're going to be in the Chronicle at the weekend because somebody's got a gun. They believe it's just an echo of that amazing story. Dickens trying to get in there on the upstairs deck. What else is happening up here? Spittle Tongues, the Hospital of St. Mary Magdalene. Anybody ever come across that before? Right, okay. You've got family everywhere, you. Spittle Tongues. A dad had a bike. There was a hospital at St. Mary Magdalene anyway. And the interesting thing about it is that it was a plague hospital for a lot of years. Also, any of the main viruses that would come by, typhus, typhoid, St. Mary's Hospital is the place that everybody would go. And they had a thing there, and I've been lucky enough to see these on two separate occasions. One of them was in a place that's actually up in Long Benton, and it's still there. There's an old hospital tucked behind the big supermarket that's in Long Benton, opposite the trading estate. I think it's Presto, might be Asda. But behind it, they've got a country park. And in the middle of the floor for the plague hospital, if you get the plague, and you may want to check the person next to you to see if they've got any of the signs. The signs were the signs were big, huge lumps. They're called buboes, and they were roughly the size of a tennis ball, and they were full of pus. And they thought back in the day that the way to survive was to get a knife and cut the buboes off. And this was like gallons of pus, we're talking, not just a little, because the average plague victim would have between 40 and 50 sores. Unfortunately, the bulk of them would be around his genitals and anus. And the idea was that you were supposed to cut the bubo and then suck the poison out and then spit it on the floor of this hospital. Now, the hospital floor was on a slope for obvious reasons, for everybody's huckling. Well, that's what they were doing. They were sucking it up, huckling it out. That's what they did. And but they thought they were doing it for all the best reasons. The people doing it were monks, a lot of them. They all died. Nurses, they did it. They all died. Relatives sometimes would come in and say, I'll help you out. Cut, huckle down the hole. And the pit at the bottom got so full of nasty that it used to froth and bubble, and it would start to ferment, and it would create its own kind of life. I know it's not nice. Sorry, everybody. We've got somebody turning green in the third seat. Are you all right? Yeah. Pass me a bucket. Well, I didn't say it was... It's Grisly. It's Grisly. It's a trail. What can I say? Anybody watch Biker Groove? Yeah, everybody watched that. Well, I think we're actually going to be heading roughly in the direction of Biker Grove. It's well, nearly. It is, of course, not in Biker. It's in the West End. It was Delaval Towers, is what it was known. When I was a little kid travelling to John Marley School in the West End, we used to go past it every day, and it's the Mitre, that's right. It became a pub, and everybody just used to look at Delaval Towers to try and look in the few windows that we could see from the road. And every day somebody would shout, "There she is! It's the Grey Lady!" And she was never there, of course. But somebody would shout it, and off we'd go. But the funny thing was, me and three of my mates decided we were going to go camping at the base of Delaval Tower. And what I didn't know is that the council had decided they were going to do it up. They'd hired a company of people called Molly Maids that are like cleaners, and they go in and they clean up all the crap that other people can't be bothered to clean up. And they'd sent them into Delaval Tower to do it. And we were right next to a downstairs window where my camp was. And we come out at like 9 o'clock at night, scared ourselves rigid, went back in to drink a bottle of pop, packet of crisps, happy days. And I'll never forget, because we were sitting outside thinking how brave we were, when suddenly the curtains opened and a Molly maid stuck her head out and kind of went, because she could hear noises. We did nearly ourselves. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the language, but I have to say, we ran back home, which was about 2.5 miles away, came back for the tent the next day. It was gone. All of our belongings were gone. And we should have said local oiks have stolen our things. But instead, we all went to school the next day and say, "We saw the ghost. She stole our tent. She took everything." And we know, I mean, deep down we all knew it was a Molly maid. We saw the van. We saw the little car parked outside. But it was funny. Also, see where we are now. We are coming down to the Tyne, Scotswood Bridge, which is a surprising place because there used to be an old bridge over the Tyne a little bit further up, which I think is still a road bridge. We're actually heading to a place that I think many of you may remember, because Metro Radio used to broadcast from here many years ago. Swalwell, named after a small well. The Romans used to use this area for their troops. It's like their little oasis. They had a well here. They'd come to get their fresh water. However, Metro Radio used to be an old pump factory. When we bought it from them to turn it into a radio station, the owner went broke of the pump factory, and they put it up for sale, and nobody bought it. When the first people came to have a look around it, thinking, well, we could maybe turn it into a garage, or we could turn it into this, or turn it into that. Actually, one of the people who considered buying it was Shepherd's Scrapyard. He's just died recently. Bit of a Rottweiler of a fella. I thought the world of him, but he was hard as nails. I always remember I went with a girlfriend to a football match once, and he was bending down fastening his shoelace, and she slapped his backside on the way up the steps, and I thought I was going to die. Because you didn't know whether he would take a joke or whether he wouldn't take a joke. He actually said, I used to pay women for doing that, thank heavens, but you were never quite sure. But between him and Freddie Fletcher, I spent 7 years working at St James's Park, and you were never quite sure which way they were going to take it. But the old Metro building, the pump factory guy, God, you're easy, please. Let's just go roundabout, shall we, for the rest of the trip? No, we're coming up towards the Metro Radio building. It's not far from here. We'll be there in a second, and once we get there, I'll finish the story. And with respect to memories of the place, we've had just amazing, happy, silly memories. We had a guy once who was Mr. Universe. That was like 5 years earlier, and he came to Metro and he wanted a job on security. Well, he was about 8 foot wide and tall, so I said, perfect. So I hired him, and one day I was away with one of the managing directors of the company doing a gig, and we came back late, 3 o'clock in the morning, and we rang the bell at the front door and there's no security. And we're thinking, well, what's going on? So we walked to the edge of the building to see if there was any lights on the downstairs offices. There was a light right at the very end. So there's me and the managing director walking through the clerks to get to this bottom window to knock, to get the guy to come and let us in so we get our car keys and drive home, to find Mr. Universe photocopying his testicles on the photocopy machine. No. Couldn't get all of them on that little thing. Not likely. No, but the other thing, we had a problem with security guards because anything attached to radio has a little bit of celebrity that kind of goes with it. And I don't know why, because it's when you're actually working in the business, it doesn't feel terribly glam. But a lot of people think that it is. And we had one other security guard. We had Metro Radio cars at the time, which you could borrow and go out and take for gigs, all with the radio station written all over. And one day, this sales rep came back and said, this car's got 60 mile on it that it shouldn't have. Did any of you guys take it out? We all said, no, we didn't. And what had happened is, at about 1 o'clock in the morning, while I was actually on air, the security guard got a phone call from a woman on Teesside saying that if he came down to Teesside, she would look after him in a kindly fashion. And he thought, Brahma, where's the keys? So I come off air at 2. There's nobody there. So I didn't think anything of it. I just let myself out and locked the door behind. I shut the door and it locks. And then you find out the following day that he'd been down. He'd been looked after lovely. And for the next 3 months, pretty much every shift that he was on had an extra 60 mile on a car. And he ended up seeing this woman, and she obviously looked after him brilliantly, for about 3.5 months before everybody twigged. And all the presenters were being dragged up in front of the boss saying, where have you been going with this car? Why don't you use your own car? All that kind of thing. But here we are. downtown Swalwell. The Highlander Bar just behind you there. No ghost story attached, but I did once see a piano come through the window. Straight through the tunnel, you will see the old pump factory. This went up for sale, and we ended up buying it, and it became the home of Metro Radio from its very beginnings in 1974. I've been with it since 76. Apart from the ghost that's in there, and there is a ghost. Yeah, that's the main door right there. Now, if you look on the upstairs floors, you'd see they're actually well lit at the moment. But the top floor, on the left-hand side, right here would be great, John, thank you. Yes, perfect. If you look at the top floor, well, there's like a little blue light in it as far as I can see. I don't know whether you can see the blue light as well. Now imagine your pump factory isn't working. I've got to sell it. Got to get rid of it somehow. So he puts it up for sale. Nobody buys it for 2 years. Then he gets a nibble from Freddie Shepherd, scrap dealers. He's got the scrapyard just at the end of the road. So he takes this over as an office for all of his industry. Why not? Freddie sent somebody along to check it out. Didn't like it. Didn't think it would turn into anything. Decided against it. So the pump man, after showing his people around, he went into that office because there was a big metal joist across the ceiling, and he chucked a rope over the top of it, and he hanged himself to death in that upstairs. Now, Andy didn't tell anybody. So, 3 weeks later, they ring the estate agent. We got another viewing. Have you got the keys? Yes, we do. Took these people for a walk around. Walked into the first office. There's the guy hanging from a beam. And ever since then, this building's had weird stuff going on. Not anywhere else but on that floor. On that floor, people being locked in rooms that don't even have a lock on the door, but you kind of get the door open. We've also had a situation where things were flying out of a photocopying machine, but it wasn't plugged in. So how was all this paper flying out of a photocopier? A lot of stuff's happened in the old Metro building. Too many stories to tell, really. But the bottom line, ghostly-wise, Shania Twain came to meet me for an interview here, and she said, I've just seen a guy from outside. She pulled up, she had an entourage of cars that didn't go in the car park. They all pulled up in limos along here. And she said, I've just seen a man. She was in one of these double-decker buses, and she had the upstairs floor and limos with like security men and what have you. And she said that when she pulled up, she looked through that window and she could see somebody hanging from a joist. Now, there's no way, because she was just over from America. I'd never spoken to her about ghosts, spirits or anything, yet she absolutely believed that she'd seen that body hanging from that window right there in the middle of the day. It was about 12 o'clock lunchtime when I interviewed her. When I told her the story of what had happened through there, she was completely and totally shaken by it. Didn't hang around. Well, thanks for the interview, Alan. I'm off now. Bye. I've gone. That's Metro. Thanks, John. We're ready when you are, mate. Thank you. Metro Radio, stories of a pop star variety. I was lucky enough to have bands in the basement. The basement used to be a big studio just with pianos and guitars and drums, and we had Tina Turner and our crew dancing, getting ready for a Gateshead stadium show in the basement. Bruce Springsteen came when he did St James's Park. He was down there. Who else did we work with? Queen. I recorded a session with Queen just after they'd made their third album, and I said that my favourite song from their first was a song called Liar. Don't know whether you've got any Queen heads in, but Liar, what a song that is. And they said, oh, do you want us to do it for you? I think so. They did that, and they did a couple of others of their own personal favourites, which was the best thing about it. Oh, I don't know how we're going to turn around here, but this is why we've got John Brown driving and not me. Come on, women, you buy equipment to do that. You get it free, yeah. Oh, that's working for me. I'm sitting on the frame here. I'd pay good money for that. Oh, hit me again. Good vibrations. Oh, I know where we're heading next. We're heading to a fairly scary place. The great thing about any radio station is the fact that the stars want to get on, they want their music played, so they're quite prepared to do stuff for us, daft stuff usually. I once remember telling Paul Carrick, who was in Mike and the Mechanics, he came in, and I decided that I was going to teach him how to play piano, Eurovision Song Contest style, and he was prepared to play all of his hits. He's just spoiling me now. Nearly round. This is an awkward turn. My fault. The back's in the river now, I hope you realise. There's a little river at the back of the Retro Radio building that overflows whenever the Tyne fills up. Tidal thing. We may all have to push. Now, Bensham. We're not going to Bensham, but we're going into Gateshead very, very briefly to probably the saddest story out of any of the things that we've got to tell you tonight. But before that, Bensham, Talmudical College, big Jewish college there in Bensham. You enjoying the bounce? Some of us get the throb, some of us get the bounce. That's fine. Enjoy what you can. But Bensham is synonymous with the story of a guy who rang me for about 15 years. And he used to say, that's where I killed the alien. Now, of course, doing Night Owls, you kind of go, yes, of course it is. However, in 1944, there is an Evening Chronicle and a Gateshead Post story, both newspapers, talking about how this man had killed an alien grey in Bensham. And he was a young kid. He was about 17. He was just getting old enough to go off and fight in the war. What he said was that a spacecraft landed behind a row of houses and loads of people saw it. This wasn't the time of sci-fi. It wasn't the time of Sputnik or satellites or any of that kind of thing. This was Second World War. I mean, people were used to looking up to the skies, but for bombers and those kind of rockets that were being sent over, they weren't looking for spacecraft. But this spacecraft apparently landed in Bensham. This young lad came out, and this creature ran at him, and he did what he thought was right at the time, because he was working on clearing rubble from houses that had been bombed the night before. He hit this alien with a shovel and then ran off for his dad and said, Dad, I've killed this thing. I don't know what it is. The dad came back, saw the thing, reported it to the police. The following day, and this is what the newspapers printed, the following day, a group of people arrived from London, took the body in a crate away with them, would not confirm whether it was a human being or not. And the police, the local police at the time said, if that's a body, you have to report it through us. They said, it's not a human being, so you don't have to worry. So therefore the newspaper said, so is it an animal? The reply they got back was, well, you could say that. Now, on first hearing you think, was he crackers? But the people did come from London. They did take the thing away in a box. They didn't tell the police what it was. If it wasn't an alien, what was it? Now, I'm not saying whether they are or they're not, because that's a whole different bus trip, I'm guessing. Fascinating story. That guy used to keep ringing me regularly, and his story never switched over all the years. Every single thing he told me, and he did tell me it a couple of times, but everything was identical each time he told it. And he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago, and the BBC One made a documentary on his life, The Man Who Killed the Grey, and it went out on BBC One. It's a fascinating little tale. Also, the Talmudical College has a ghost rabbi. They don't believe in them, but they've got a ghost at the Talmudical College, and it's a rabbi. And the rabbi killed himself in 1899 because he stopped believing in Judaism. So therefore he felt that if he couldn't continue following the faith that was paying him to be a religious leader, he would take his own life. The ghost rabbi is now upsetting other rabbis who aren't supposed to believe in him, but they keep saying him, so that's the Talmudical College. Windmill Hills, Gateshead. Has anybody ever heard of it? Do you know where it is, roughly? Yeah, you've heard of it. It's not far from Gateshead town centre, really. If you know where the big cinema is and the shopping centre right in the middle, it's down overlooking the river, and it's an old, terrifying looking building. I'll let you see it before I tell you the tale, because it's probably the saddest one I've got for you tonight. Although, I think the thing that you realise is just every corner that you turn here, there's a story of something. Something's happened. We're heading into Lower Gateshead now, passing where the Gateshead Garden Festival was held. A lot of people might remember that back in the day. Had a lot of laughs. Should have left it where it was. Should have kept it there forever, because it was really improved that part of Gateshead for the longest time. Gateshead was actually the direction that William Wallace's troops came to try and take Newcastle. They fought on the town moor when they couldn't get in the front door, which is over the Tyne Bridge. That's why they were chucking the heads over, like we mentioned before. Windmill Hills used to be an old job centre in the 1950s and 60s. And in the 1970s it was bought by someone else, but the building goes back a lot of years. It looks like it could accommodate probably 300 people. Huge building. And we want to say a big thank you to Tyne Idols as well for letting us use their bus. It's very kind, it's lovely. They do trips to show you where all the celebs and all the stars have performed and where they lived. They do trips of all different kinds. So make sure you try and get a flyer and use them again. They've got people that do this for a living, not just wallies like me that dive in and have a go. So, not far away from it now. So let me tell you the story of Windmill Hills. When the bus stops, that's where we'll be. In the 1700s, there was a man called Charles Henderson. Now, he actually owned about a third of Newcastle at the time. He was big news. He was very, very rich. Charles Henderson bought a teenage bride from a tinker. She was 9 years old, and he'd never let her leave Windmill Hills. She lived there for her entire life. She died in there, brutalized. He beat her as a child. She fell pregnant at 10, but he kicked her down the stairs 3 days before the child was born. When the child, little George, was born, he was completely deformed. Henderson said that although he had a son and heir, he didn't want to accept that the child was his. Refused to even call him by his name, George. He called him the Grunt. Had a mouth on the side of his head, eyes that looked the other way. His nose was squashed. He had no ears. And when he grew up, he was kind of hunched over. He couldn't talk. They locked him in the upstairs, the top room of the top tower, which is directly facing us. I don't know whether you can see it. It's like a circular window. Can you see it on the top tower? There's 1, 2, 3, and there's a... Hang on, let me have a look. Yeah. Tiny little room at the top of the tower. It's where the Grunt was placed. It was a 12-foot room. It had no windows in it. Henderson wasn't the father. He didn't know he wasn't the father. But the tinker was actually the girl's dad. And the dad impregnated his daughter, and the child was deformed because of incest. So, the tinker raped her. Henderson beat the tinker to death with his silver-top cane on the lawn at the front. So, what you're staring at now, he beat him to death, and he was never prosecuted. You got to remember, this guy was the richest man in Newcastle. He was paying magistrates and paying police, and he could do what he liked. George, young George, died in that room at the top of the building. He died of influenza, aged 24. He'd never ever stepped out into the fresh air. He'd only ever seen what he could see through that window. Now, back in the time, this was a carriageway, and carriages would come up and down here. Much smaller road. A lot of the buildings weren't here. This was all beautiful countryside, which was why the house on Windmill Hills was the only thing hereabouts. It was almost like it was on a country estate. Now, in Windmill Hills, in its various incarnations, people have been grabbed by a small figure that's held them round the leg and round the waist as if trying to get a little bit of love. The people have been scared witless by stuff going on, noises, and a kind of the little guy couldn't speak, but he kind of made a kind of snorting noise. And do you want something to eat? It was the only way he could answer was by making the grunt noise that gave him his unfortunate nickname. People's been grabbed. One job centre woman was so terrified of what happened to her in there, she was actually having a cup of tea in a tea room on the top floor. The top floor is next to an even higher floor, which just has that one 12-foot room. And she was in that room on her own when something literally got a hold of her from behind and grabbed her so hard that she thought her neck was going to break. She was taken to the QE hospital in Gateshead, where they filled the report still there for people to see. She had small handprints on her neck. Couldn't explain how she got them. When people stare at the windows for any length of time, you can see the little corner of her head sticking up through a curtain or looking out through a window. And it's the Gateshead grunt. Sad names, little George really. And the other ghost that's said to be there is the ghost of the tinker, because they believed the tinker was the father, and that's what he told everybody. However, the reality, when they actually buried the guy, it wasn't the father. He was the brother that had a hard paper round, but was only 4 years older than the girl. So it wasn't the father at all. He was a haggerty-looking kid, but he was only a young boy who'd impregnated the girl. So, horrible story. Thank you very much for that, dearest driver. Perfect timing. Good on you. We're heading now back across to Newcastle. Eventually, a lot of people haven't even heard of probably the biggest thing that happened in Gateshead ever, the Great Fire of Gateshead. Has anybody ever heard of the Great Fire of Gateshead? We heard of the Great Fire of London, pudding chair and the guy burying his cheese. Hope that's not a euphemism. Anyway, but we seem to know more about that than we do about our own, is the thing. And apparently what happened was there's loads of factories along the banks of the River Tyne on the Gateshead side. And they used to keep loads of chemicals in them. Big drums full of paint, spirits, kerosene, loads of chemicals of one sort or another, because this was at the beginning, really, of the Industrial Revolution. And one day, some late-night operative decided that he was going to put a barbecue on for him and his mates and bake a couple of potatoes so he had some hot food late of the night. And he set the whole building on fire, which, of course, set the kerosene on fire, which fired these projectiles of liquid, burning liquid, in all directions. Now, we're talking horrific consequences. Some of the canisters that fired from the factories went so high in the air that they landed on the Newcastle side. They were landing in the masts of tall ships. Of course, the tall ships were wooden, so they'd all go. And the furthest one, Dean Street in Newcastle, leads down to the quayside. The furthest canister went to the top of Dean Street, landed on an upstairs flat. Now, back then, there weren't things like houses or apartments. There were tenements, and there was families living like 8 to a 2-bedroom property. The grandparents were there, parents, kids, and entire families were wiped out by these red-hot, exploding barrels of of one thing or another. There you go. They're probably skipping the council tax, I'm guessing, back in the day. But the Great Fire of Gateshead, once it started, it was absolutely unstoppable, because they had, at the time, there were houses built on the Tyne Bridge, not the big Tyne Bridge. The little Tyne Bridge had businesses on them, and they were all wooden huts selling the swing bridge, that's right, and they had businesses on it. It didn't swing at the time, and all of those buildings burnt. A lot of people tried to run across the Newcastle Bridge to what they thought was safety, but the entire bridge was on fire, and a lot of people started running and they never made it to the other side. They burst into flames themselves. They said that a lot of the liquids had also landed in the river. Now, because a lot of them were oil, they still burnt on the surface. So you're running over a bridge that had liquid underneath it on fire. The bridge was on fire. The buildings on the bridge were on fire. It equals you're on fire. And a lot of people died. And there's a fabulous story of the Tux, for those of you that have danced there. It's the only time that you can say when you're drunk you walked in a straighter line, was because the dance floor was rotating with you, so you could actually manage to stay on your feet instead of falling on somebody. The Tux, there's a very famous story. Is that right? Well, there you go. You live and learn. I'll try not to remember that for the next trip. The Tuxedo Princess, though, has got 3 bouncers who were watching people coming down to park in the little car park that they had. Was not enough ever for the amount of people that went there to dance. But 3 bouncers were looking out the window one day, and they saw somebody on the grass outside the ship on fire. One of them ran and grabbed a fire extinguisher, shouted to his 2 mates, "Do you see that?" They say, "Yes." "What the F's going on?" "I don't know." They ran out with a fire extinguisher to put the person out, literally, and there was nobody there. None of them had any idea about the Great Fire of Gateshead. Whether it's connected, I have no idea. But it's fascinating that it would have been right on the epicenter, roughly, of where the factories were that all exploded. Tyne Bridge. There's supposed to be ghosts in the bridge, because for many years, when it was first built, there were lifts up the legs, there were stairs up the legs, and all the working girls in the vicinity used to use it as the dark place to take a sailor. And, well, apart from the other place they took a sailor. But it was inside the Tyne Bridge, and the council said the reason that they were going to stop people using the inside of the Tyne Bridge was because women of ill repute were using it for illicit purposes, when the reality was that a lot of the prostitutes had been murdered in there by people who used them, didn't want to pay, and had been strangling them. But we're coming along here. Oh, incidentally, the swing bridge is haunted too. The guy who runs the swing bridge is a night owl. He came on last year telling me that he hates being in there alone because he hears people's boots walking around different rooms down there. And to paraphrase the first call that he made, "Alan, when I'm in there by myself, I'm shite myself," was his precise phrase. Thought about cutting him off, but no, look at that beautiful river. And imagine, just picture for a second, because we're on the Newcastle side now, imagine something firing from one of those buildings sufficiently high in the sky to go to the top of Dean Street. That's the kind of power that we're talking about for the Great Fire of Gateshead. We're coming along here because we have to talk about the Cooperage. Anybody ever gone dancing at the Rock Club at the Cooperage back in the day? Blimey, with your Def Leppard and your Deep Purple. Well, all the people used to come off the ships, the tall ships on the Tyne. Press gangs, absolutely. And they were looking for people to get into the King's Navy because nobody wanted to join, because you were away for years at a time and you didn't get paid very much money. The money you did get, you had to spend some of it while you were actually on board the ship. Do you want any bonus rations? Yeah, give me some money. So some people would come back off a British ship, one of the royal ships, and they'd owe money, and they'd have to sign up for another voyage to pay off the debt that they had, which is how they kept them on board the ship. So a lot of people didn't want to join. So when the press gangs came along here, when you see the cooperage, it's a old black and white building. It's on your left-hand side. You'll see it very clearly. You'll look at the point at the very top, because a young lad used to sit on the point at the very top of the building and watch out for press gangs coming. And the people that were having a beer would give him a silver threepenny bit for keeping them safe. However, one day the press gang saw the lad doing this, pulling a little wire, ringing a bell, and everybody legged up the stairs to where the castle keep is and into the city, out the way, so that they were staying safe. Well, very nearly there. This lad was dragged down from the top of the cooperage, and they nailed him to the door at the side of the property, which, if you go down to the cooperage, there's a little alleyway on the right-hand side of the building that leads up to the castle keep. They nailed him, and this is 5 nails, 2 hands, 2 feet, testicles, to the door. They actually cut off his penis and put it in his mouth. Had there been a sausage seller there ever since? No, there hasn't. But that's what... Wah! They're coming for you. So the cooperage has got the ghost of the little boy in the top floor. The most famous is called Old Clothy. Old Clothy was the woman who used to own the cooperage back in the day. She used to tease press gangs. You've missed them again, and all this kind of stuff, till eventually one day they got absolutely sick of her, and they put her on board a ship. And it said that when they got to sea, all the sailors would use her. Her body is said to be still infesting, lurking, hanging about the cooperage. And quite often you see a dark shadow running up the stairs at the side of the cooperage. Also, Harry here, who's our VIPs who paid a bonus for the front seats, used to work in Charlie's bar, and apparently whenever he got down to the cellars, which has the original struts of the first Tyne Bridge beneath it. It's on your right hand side here, just as we're coming to it. Charlie's bar. It's called Sambuca's now, if you're in the vicinity. We're going to turn around the corner and you're going to see everything that we're talking about. We're just crossing the river, and directly ahead of us is Poplars, as you can see. But we're cutting round here first to do that roundabout, and you will see, there it is, just round the corner. We're coming to the cooperage. There's the cooperage. You see the V-shaped top where the lad used to sit. Top floor's where he haunts. There's the alley down the side with the little door attached to it, where he took one in the cobblers for them. His ghost's supposed to run up and down those stairs all the time. We're coming a bit further along where there's an even more famous house, Bessie Surtees' house. There's a boat that travels up and down the Tyne called the Bessie Surtees, named after this place we're just coming to. There's a plaque on the wall just here. There it is, Bessie Surtees. From that window there, just there, it's middle of the bus now, right at the back. It's the Red House, it used to be called. John Scott, he ended up becoming Lord Eldon, hence the name Eldon Square and all the rest of it. John Scott, he was a poor lad, did well for himself. Tried to marry Bessie Surtees. Bessie Surtees' dad said, bugger off. And John Scott says, no, I love your daughter, I'm going to have her. She's going to be mine. So one night, on his horse, beautiful grey horse, trots up to that window. Bessie Surtees climbs out the window onto the back of his horse, trots off. As soon as she starts riding away with her beloved, round the corner, up towards Dean Street, the father, who was a huntsman, said, release the hounds on them, set the dogs on them, let them rip them to pieces. Set the dogs on her. So they unleashed the dogs. John Scott got halfway up Dean Street and said, I'm never going to beat the dogs up here. So took a left and went up the big flight of stairs that's called the Dog Leap Stairs, after the dogs being sent after John Scott. The horse, which must have been a hell of a critter, got right up to the top. They got to the top, galloped away. lived happily ever after. John Scott became Lord Eldon. Bessie Surtees' dad became bankrupt and ultimately got murdered. Karma again. And Bessie Surtees is probably one of the great heroines, I suppose, because she was prepared to stand up to a bullying father for the sake of true love, which is very nice. You sometimes see Bessie's face at the window, and it said, if ever you do, it's almost like a photograph of her waiting for a man to come when she'd packed her bag and she was ready to go. We've only got one more stop to come. I'll tell you about that when we get there. We're not very far away from it. It's where we're going to disembark, but just before we do, coming up Dean Street now, there's a pub on this side, next to the tune. What's it called? Crown Posada. Crown Posada. On the first floor, there was a murder in the 1920s on the first floor, where a mother force-fed a child to death. The child's supposed to be knocking stuff over. Sometimes in the cellar of the pub, we've heard that this thing's go on, but it was upstairs in an upstairs room. This particular street that we're on now was where the marauding Scots came from the original Newcastle Bridge, the Swing Bridge, up here in force, and they got to about here, roughly, coincidentally, where the club with naked women is at the moment, but that wasn't the reason the Scots stopped. They stopped because it was Castle Whalley. This is where they were chucking the heads of the English over the wall, which is roughly where we started our trip tonight. But the story that we've got for you to finish with is Newcastle Cathedral. Beautiful building. We're just coming to it. It's around the very next corner. Big statue of Victoria outside now. Lovely building. Few things to look at. At the time when they were fighting the Scots, any Scots that were captured traditionally would go to the castle keep, but it was full. So they started keeping Scottish prisoners in the cellars of Newcastle Cathedral. However, the priests running the cathedral said, if we're going to keep all these prisoners here, you're going to have to give me some money for food for them. They're thinking, we got to pay for food for them. No, just leave them in there. If they die, they die. Weeks, months, about 4 years, they were living and dying in the cathedral, and nobody was feeding them because the church refused to feed people that were attacking Newcastle. Some of the Scots tried to survive by eating each other. As soon as somebody died, they would try and eat them, drink the blood, drink their own urine, trying to stay alive any which way they can. We hear what's supposed to happen if you put your ear up against the base of there's the cathedral. If you put your ear to the bottom part of the walls here, you're supposed to hear the noise of the Scottish prisoners sighing and pleading and being desperate to escape. If you leave it here just for a second, this is a perfect parking place. I don't know whether we can legally, but thank you very much. Can we have a round of applause for John Brown, our driver? He's been brilliant. Can we have a round of applause also for Tyne Idols for the bus? And Cash for Kids! And there is, just before I finish my story for you, there's one person without whom tonight would not have worked. That's me. Thank you very much, everybody. Hope you've enjoyed it. Right. If you get off here, whether you do this tonight, it's a snotty, rainy night. I could understand if you don't. When you get off, you'll see there's a tiny little pathway behind the cathedral, just down the hill and then to your left. And you see spirit moving around that alley. Don't think they're Scots. Remember me telling you about the big plague pit that was up at the Civic Centre? The biggest plague pit in all of Newcastle is behind the cathedral in a square. And what they've also got in the square, they've got some graves that they've just put a skull and crossbones on. Doesn't mean they were a pirate, doesn't mean they were cannibals. It means they were plague victims. But they've only put 6, 7 graves when there's something like 18,000 bodies down there. So every now and then around the back of the cathedral you see stuff coming up from the ground. You see smoky figures moving around. We've got some listeners that have taken photographs and shown us of stuff like that. And also, just to put a cap on it, if you want to see something really funky and downright peculiar, especially if you've got a camera, you know, we talked about the Knights Templars. The Knights Templars used to leave little symbols in places where they've been so that other Knights Templars will know they're on the right track, either to a place of safety or a place where the Christ family have been. Now, we mentioned that they were in Fenham, they had their building. It's been flattened, so there's not a sign of it left. However, they left a sign behind the cathedral, directly facing God, essentially, traditional religion. Directly opposite, you will see a door that has the most ridiculous decoration around it imaginable, including a vampire rabbit. The were-rabbit. It's not really the were-rabbit, but it is a vampire rabbit. And it's around the back, facing the cathedral, as if for the Templars to say, up yours, church, we're here and we're not going anywhere. And it's still there to this day, and it's mentioned in the original Da Vinci Code. So, anyway, hope you've enjoyed it. I'm going on the wireless. I look forward to, hopefully, broadcasting to you. Thanks for your time and thanks for coming. More importantly, thanks for raising money for Cash for Kids. Thanks, and have a good night. Good night. God bless you. Wish you well.